Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, today, we've got the Wall Street Journal on the show. Matt Barnum, their K through 12 education reporter, is on the show to talk about tariffs and what's happening in Washington, D.C.
The ACSA legislative lunch break starts now.
And it's just after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break, along with Dr. Edgar Zazweta, ACSA's executive director. I'm Naj Alakan, ACSA's senior director of marketing and communications. Welcome. We are honored to have you back after, Edgar, I think it was just a week off. It just feels like we had been doing so many shows. I think I had lost count.
I was all ready to be. I think I was sitting in this chair last week, and then I missed the memo that we were not on. So I was waiting for you to come on, Naj. You never showed. So
I know. Hey, look, we like to surprise you with some of these things. That's what we like to do. Neri's first in the chat today, giving us a weather report from downtown LA.
I love the weather reports there. Yeah, throughout the
year.
Year.
Neri is actually really good at providing us the weather forecast.
That or just people just flexing on the beautiful parts of California.
Exactly, because you see Gail Olson down there.
Yeah.
In San Diego, where it's 78 degrees.
Mexico, Hawaii.
Yeah, seriously.
San Diego.
Lester Powell with us, Rusty Gordon, Scott Nanick, our ACSA board member from Region 7. So good to have you guys with us, have you back with us here on the show. Again, coming up in just a moment, we're going to have Matt Barnum. He's the K through 12 education reporter at the Wall Street Journal on the show. Let's talk a little bit about public education, what's happening in Washington, D.C., and the tariffs and the impact of tariffs on school districts, specifically here in California. So Edgar will talk to him about that. A couple of news headlines for you. And Edgar, we've talked about the Secure Rural Schools Act on this show many times before. Jamie Green has been on, one of our great ACSA members. This is that bill that has been reauthorized since 2000 that provides financial assistance to districts where federal land restricts their ability to collect taxes to support school funding. That money has not been approved as of this morning, and it could have some devastating impacts on counties nationwide, according to an article that was published by Oregon Public Radio. And we're going to go ahead and put a link into our comment section on that. The Forest Service, which runs the program, provided $230 million to 41 states. But our good friend, again, Jamie Green from Trinity Alps Unified School District, Jeff Harris, former ACSA board member, he is superintendent in Del Norte Unified School District. Both of them are quoted in the article talking about the impact of this act not being reauthorized at this very moment, Edgar. It just speaks to there's a lot of chaos in Washington, D.C. that we're all balancing here. And in some communities, it has a greater impact.
Oh, yeah. Just shout out to Jeff and Jamie and all those folks who have been doing tremendous work on this. I mean, really not taking anything for granted. I know they've been making the trips to D.C., trying to organize support, and then just the nature of thing. And, and Matt knows better than anybody who our guest. We'll talk about some of the other interesting things happening in Washington, D.C. But this is one of those pieces where, as our folks are saying, is going to have an impact. I know they're beating the drum. We were just some of us at the Small School Districts Association. And shout out to I saw some of our friends here that are also in the chat. And I know that was a undercurrent about just some of these efforts that are even in California, right? That there's this perspective about the type of schools that we have, but it's such a big percentage of our schools. And I think with this federal action, it's one that I know our folks and us at ACSA are going to continue to be pushing for.
Yeah. Again, we'll talk with our guest in just a couple of moments. I do have some good news, Edgar. California Student Aid Commission, as many of you know, extended their deadline for financial aid requests, and it turned out to be very good. That extension turned into 57,000 additional applications. That's more than 300,000 high school seniors in the state completing the application before last week's deadline. All of this, that deadline extension, it turns out We now have 24,000 more applications this year. A reminder, the federal FAFSA deadline is June 30th. But Edgar, I mean, it is proof. We give just a little bit more leeway, and the numbers are really good, especially at this time of year.
Yeah, that's good. Some good news on that front, Naj. I know we've been working with the California Student Aid Commission for some years, and I know that, given all of the issues, and it's not just what's happening in DC, but this has been a concerning trend where we've seen, applications falling off. Obviously, we had some other circumstances here in California with natural disasters, with other pieces, with this, the FAFSA changing. So I think, the more availability, opportunity, accessibility that we give, I think just given what we're seeing with the college numbers, I think that is great news that we have more folks applying for that aid.
Yeah, so we'll keep following that. Let's go ahead and switch to our main topic today. We've got a great guest for you. Matt Barnum is the K-12 education reporter with the Wall Street Journal. Matt, welcome to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Your very first time with us here on the Legislative Lunch Break. Let me ask you this. The headline of last week, of course, was the president imposing these substantial tariffs on countries that have been trade partners for decades. And I went to a few superintendents here in the state of California to find out how tariffs could or would impact their school districts. And I'll just go over a couple of those. Number one, they said technology. Then we have vehicle fleet replacements, capital projects that will now be delayed or canceled because they were contingent on established budgets or school bonds, even school meals. According to reports today, there's a bit of a temporary pause. But how are schools? What is the feedback you're getting from schools about how they're supposed to support students when things seem to be changing like every single day in Washington?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for having me. I'm coming to you. I'll give a weather report from Brooklyn, New York. It's a balmy 40 degrees.
Oh
my goodness, it's 40 degrees?
It's in the 40s. Yeah, I think it's like 45 right now. And it's April, so welcome to New York for anyone who wants to visit from LA or
another. You just gave our tourism board here, a few more clicks here.
Big increase. Yeah. So I mean, I think for students, I mean, obviously schools have to put on a brave face and school district leaders need to deal with whatever's being thrown at them. Right now, as far as I can tell, budgets are pretty tight. The COVID relief money, the ESSER funds are gone. The Department of Education is trying to claw back any remaining ESSER funds unless you go through an appeal process. State budgets do not appear to be flush. I'm not sure the situation in California, but my understanding is budgets aren't flush in California. So if there are widespread increases, if the tariffs go through and there are widespread increases on physical goods like Chromebooks or buildings, that could hit school budgets. I do think the one thing to keep in mind is the vast majority of school budgets go towards people hiring staff, and that won't be affected. But that's, that may be cold comfort if everything else is going up.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate you joining us and giving us kind of this national landscape to this conversation. And I mean, it's safe to say we've been talking a lot about as California. We're focused so much on what, state budget and whatnot. So much of what's going to impact that state budget, I think, is going to be connected to, what happens with federal funding, what happens with the economy as a whole. I think that's the place where I think we're also worried about what is the economic forecast and how is it going to drive, what happens with state revenues. Kind of switching topics for a bit. The other big piece coming out of DC over the last couple of months is the changes that the president and the new administration has set forth, specifically on the Department of Ed. And we've had this conversation, as you know, we had the secretaries of education, a couple of them come in, and we've been talking about this. So obviously there's been a few developments that they have, while, can you give us an update on just the latest? I know as we've told folks, the Department of Ed, it requires an act of Congress, but for all intents and purposes, they have moved to dismantle it piece by piece. And I think the one piece that our folks are concerned about is how is this going to impact federal funding, if at all? What can you tell our viewers about those issues?
So as your viewers know, President Trump issued an executive order, I believe a couple weeks ago, directing Linda McMahon, the education secretary, to start to do everything possible to dismantle the education department. And she said, yes, I will do it. And she's already gotten a head start by laying off or reducing headcount of the education department staff by half. Now, the most relevant thing for your listeners is that the Trump administration and Linda McMahon have reiterated over and over again that the major funding streams for education, Title I and IDEA, are not going anywhere. They've said they do not want to eliminate those funding streams. They want to make the funds more efficient. They want to get more of it down to schools. They want to get rid of the bureaucracy. And so that's what they've said. And, and I think for that reason, schools have not seen a big impact. Now, what we have seen is a dramatic reduction in the staff at the Office for Civil Rights, which could lead to a longer wait time for parents who file civil rights complaints, particularly against schools, though the administration has said that they're improving the process to deal with that. There's also been deep cuts to the research arm at the Education Department, IES, but the administration says that they're planning on rebuilding that. I think we are going to have to see what happens with the big funding streams, which have to be reauthorized by Congress. In the prior administration, the first Trump term, he did seek to cut funding for the major federal funding streams, but Congress wouldn't go along with it. So we need to keep an eye on and see what happens with those big funding streams.
Matt Barnum from the Wall Street Journal is with us, folks. If you have any questions for Matt, go ahead and jump into the chat. We'll try and get to some of those at the end of our interview. Matt, for our viewers to know, you are a middle school teacher, someone who interacted with students every day. If you were in front of the students today, or their parents, or their guardians, their relatives, what are you saying about the state of education in this country at this moment?
In general, I think that educators probably are sort of keeping their head down and doing their job and not focused on the big picture things that are happening in Washington. If a parent asked about, is the education department being dismantled? I think if I were a teacher, I would say, I'm going to focus on, I don't know, I'm going to focus on my ELA lesson. I taught 8th grade ELA. And so I think the focus in schools is and probably should be what the education that's happening in those schools. But to the extent that, teachers or administrators want to talk about the big picture things, or they get questions, this is a interesting moment in American education, and a fraught moment, with efforts to make big changes to the federal Department of Education, and with deep concerns about where U.S. students are at academically, and with deep declines in learning post-pandemic that haven't recovered.
Matt, kind of on that same topic, as we noted, we had former Secretary Arne Duncan, John King here over the last few weeks talking about some of these issues. And then, they both made note that their opinion that sometimes the decisions that are made in Washington, that those are, politically motivated, that there's, obviously the perspective of the new administration. They were opining in terms of how they believe that that's going to play itself out. I'm curious from your perspective, somebody who's following what's happening in DC and the kind of this national landscape, the Department of Ed, obviously the attack on DEI, whatnot. Do you feel like, is this just the beginning of a larger trend? Do you think this administration is going to be really focused on holistically on these education issues? Or is this something that, like on so many issues with the new administration, we're getting out of the gate on this front? How do you see this playing itself out? Is this what we've gotten to ask the question? Is it going to be like this for the next 4 years about like constant changes as it relates to education?
I think it's clear that the administration takes its education promises very seriously, and what it wants to do to change American schools, and perhaps especially universities. And President Trump, while he was campaigning, said what he was going to do. And I wrote a story, I believe in September, maybe October, before the election, sort of previewing how what promises he made. And I wasn't necessarily sure that he would do all these things, but to a large extent, he really has focused on doing the things that he promised to do. Including, and this was one that some experts sort of said, well, he put this down on paper, but it's never really happened. The politics are bad, including trying to dismantle the education department. So it's clear that they are focused on that as an issue. Now, there are other things happening, and lots of administrations come in with big hopes and big promises, including the Biden administration, which, as some of you may recall, promised to triple Title I. As your viewers know, Title I was not tripled. And so an administration can come in with hopes and promises, but it doesn't actually happen for lots of political reasons. But so far, it seems like education is a major priority for this administration.
Yeah, and that begs the question, Matt, is there big things on his promise list that maybe they haven't gotten to there? I mean, the one piece in talking to some of our colleagues, around the country, something that California hasn't dealt with. I know there is this big conversation about choice or vouchers or whatnot. I mean, do you see any other trends outside of what we've seen there in the early days?
Yeah, I think choice is the one that's worth keeping an eye on. He did put out an executive order on it that I don't think had led to any major changes, but there are efforts to fold in a tax credit that could allow tax credit subsidies for private school tuition or other expenses, other education expenses, including outside traditional public schools that school choice advocates are hoping to get into the reconciliation package. And so I could definitely see that being the next thing that gets a lot of attention.
Matt, it's funny, Edgar asked the question,
yeah,
and you were kind of responding to it about, the president made all of these campaign promises, which politicians are wont to do.
Yeah.
But he's legitimately said, okay, here are all the promises, and he's just kind of knocking them out one by one by one.
Yeah.
You talked just right there about school choice.
Yeah.
And an effort to fold in a tax credit for school choice. What's the next important story with respect to public education that we could tell our viewers to be prepared for, or I guess something that's going to surprise them that none of us really expected?
Yeah, that's a good
I'm putting you on the spot on this.
Yeah, one. I would have, maybe I would have written an article if I knew the answer to it. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sort of interested. I'm interested in the continued discussions around the science of reading and reforms related to that. I'm interested if there will be other policy efforts related to, the addressing learning loss. I think the choice stuff is interesting and how they approach that, and whether other states continue to expand vouchers or voucher-like programs. I'm also kind of curious how this administration approaches charter schools. The prior Trump administration was rhetorically a major supporter of charter schools, but actually they tried to once cut the federal charter schools program, which really enraged charter school advocates. So I'm not entirely sure where the administration is going to come down on charter schools. The other big charter school issue is a case coming up before the Supreme Court, which some of your viewers may be aware of. It's about an Oklahoma a school or aspiring school that wants to be a Catholic charter school. Oklahoma law, like I believe every state that has charter schools, says that charter schools are public schools and cannot be religious. The Oklahoma school is challenging that and saying that charter schools actually should be allowed to be religious.
Interesting.
That'll be one to keep an eye on. Matt Barnum is the K-12 education reporter from the Wall Street Journal. And earlier, Edgar, and I think you would agree, Matt did his best to be the Chamber of Commerce in Brooklyn to tell us what the temperature was, which is 40 degrees in New York City. So, Matt, it's been an honor to have you here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We look forward to having you again soon.
Yeah, thanks so much. Great to meet you guys, and be in touch anytime. I love talking to school leaders.
Thanks, Matt. Take care.
Yep.
Edgar, there was a question that Neri posed, asking, how does the pause announced today by the president affect California or education in general? And I think that, as I was looking on NBC to try and just figure out, the pauses and China's tariffs are still in effect, and other countries that are negotiating maybe down to 10%. I mean, that I'm not a math guy, but it just seems like everything is so fluid, Edgar, especially with these tariffs, that it's really hard to identify where we're at on some of these things.
Well, here's the biggest connection, and I foresee that this is going to be a big topic of discussion as we lead. I know we've been focusing a lot on the federal fund, but as we said, this is all interconnected. I know we're just about to enter state May revise tax revenue season, right? In terms of that, this time this year, we're always doing some forecasting. What's the state budget going to look like, whatnot? And here's the thing. I mean, if it feels like it was an eternity ago, but even in January, you know, like the budget was relatively, I'm going to use relatively okay, right? You know, and then always in California, you always hear the caveats about the out years and, you know, and revenues and the state being conservative on that front. The one thing that we have been increasingly a little bit worried about over the last couple of weeks, that the insiders and, you know, that are following the state budget and looking at the revenues, that they are getting a little bit more nervous about what may happen for the reason that you stated, that there's just so much uncertainty. California is so reliant on the wealthiest earners here in California, where so much of that, the capital gains, the money wrapped up in the stock market. So as the national fluctuation on the economy has shifted over the last couple of weeks because of the tariffs, I think the big concern, and I'll use concern as a word, as a theme here moving forward, is that how is this going to impact our state budget? And consequently, how is this going to impact Prop 98 in terms of the dollars that are going to our schools? So the pause, I think, is good. And actually, we've been running around. I'm not even up to speed on the particulars of the pause yet, right? But I do think that this whole notion about what is the connection now to the May revise, what can the state actually rely on, because the landscape is changing so much. And now we have a number of different variables. We had the fires at the beginning of the year. Now we have this up and down with the stock market. We have this changing. We have tariffs. We don't have tariffs, right? There's going to be a lot of uncertainty. If I had to guess that the May revise in May, the May revise from the governor is going to be like, we just don't know. We have to be careful because this could change very drastically. I think that will be the most important story here moving forward as we enter into the last months of the fiscal year.
Well, you know what, you mentioned the May revision, and I'll promo the May revision in just a second, but haven't we gotten into a position, Edgar, where the May revision has come up or the budget has come up? It's one or the other, the budget in January, and the proposal is kind of like a skeleton of things. The May revision is kind of a skeleton of things because we're sitting here trying to figure out what tax revenues are going to be. And in this case, we might be looking at what is the impact from the federal government.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're trying to think about just impact generally, right? Like thinking about it, how is this going to impact our schools? How is it going to mean in terms of revenue? I think you asked a very pragmatic question to Matt about like, hey, our organizations here at schools in California, across the country, they're big employers. They're big pictures. They purchase goods, right? That's going to have a direct impact on us as organizations. Then you think about it, the state budget. I know one thing we're even thinking about is like us at ACSA. What's the impact going to be there, right? I think we're all just trying to make sense of this this drastically changing landscape, and just see what is this going to mean in the short term, but more importantly, even in the out years.
Yeah, and that gives me an opportunity to let everybody know our April 30th episode of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. John Gray is going to be here from School Services of California, so mark your calendar for that. Want to give you a little bit of information on some things we have going on here at ACSA. We'll start with our new exclusive web series, The Critically Conscious Classroom. As I said, it's an exclusive web series. You can register for that, ACSA.org/equity. Now, if you've already registered for a previous episode, they'll automatically be registered for future episodes. Also want to tell you about our Lead with Pride Summit that comes your way April 30th through May 2nd in Anaheim. This event brings together educational leaders to help create schools where students and staff feel safe and valued and celebrated. Again, that is April 30th through May 2nd, our Lead with Pride Summit. We also want to tell you about our Summer Leadership Institute. That's June 23rd through 27th at the University of Laverne. ACSA.org/professional-learning to learn more about those. If you like what you've seen here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we invite you to subscribe to us on YouTube, like us on Facebook. When you do, you'll get instant alerts when Edgar and I are going to come on for breaking news. And then, of course, reminders about our regularly scheduled Wednesday show. If you have great stories happening in your school districts, we want to tell those stories as well. Go ahead and send in your photos, your news releases, your talking points to our EdCal editor, Michelle Caro at mcarl@axa.org. Edgar, Matt had some really, really interesting thoughts. Talking about the ESSER funds and the COVID funds expiring, talking about state budgets not necessarily being flush, talked about charter schools and tax credits and school choice and all of that. There was just, there was so much. I think what my big takeaway from it was that we don't know what the federal government is going to be doing next, and we don't know how that's going to impact us right after. But it just feels like every day at noon, we just never know what's happening.
Yeah, a little unsettling. I think it's fair to say, right? Just that you'd see how the markets are responding, how employers are responding. You see by the day, just the economic experts are ratcheting back their expectations again. This is all going to have a connection to California, to our state budget, to ultimately the funding that goes to our schools over the next few years. So I'll be interested to see just like a pause, while good, maybe that'll help some things. If it's just putting it off, how will the economic experts react to that? So you mentioned John Gray and school services. I'm sure when we have them on, they'll have a lot to say about that connection, about the broader economic factors. What does this mean for California schools?
I am going to force John Gray to make predictions like we did last year, so that in the weeks after we can come back to him and be like, John, you were wrong about everything.
Yeah. we like telling John he's wrong. Rarely wrong, but
rarely wrong. Yeah. Folks, thanks so much for joining us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Remember, we are live and interactive Wednesdays here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.